let's go ahead and get started. I'm Rose Banzaf, and I am here in Woodland Park. I am on the Colorado Project Learning Tree Advisory Board, as well as several other volunteer places in the state in environmental education. I want to welcome everyone and let you know that if you have any emergency tech help that you need, you can dial into Nicole's number, and I'll put that up in the chat room in a minute. So thanks to CIEE's virtual Professional Development Day. Thank you for joining us. And I'm going to be your session host for this hour. We want to thank all of our conference sponsors who've continued their support through challenges and changes that have occurred over the last few weeks, and we appreciate all of you very much. To make sure that things are running smoothly, we have a few reminders to everyone relating to Zoom. First, make sure that your lines are muted and use the chat function to send a message to presenters or to all participants during our session. Please add your name right now to the group chat so we can see who has joined us today. You can see down here at the bottom of the screen where the chat is. And if you run into technical issues, please send a private chat to me via the chat button. Again, my name is Rose Banzaf. If you're disconnected, you may call Nicole. I'll put that number up for you. Feel free also to use the chat function as well to send questions to our presenter. And be patient with us. This is fairly new to many of us. And so on that note, I'm pleased to introduce our presenter, Aidan Goldie from Walking Mountains Science School.
According to Wikipedia, Clifford Joseph Prize PE.
And he will be our presenter for the next hour or so. So welcome, Aidan, and take it away.
Sweet, thanks. I think I need you. There we go, perfect. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Let's see. Are you able to see my slide?
Yes.
Are we up? Perfect. Awesome. Yeah, thank you for joining us today. Thanks, Rose, for the introduction. My name is Aidan, and I'm affiliated with the Walking Mountains Science Center in Avon, Colorado. And today I'm giving a presentation titled Introducing the Citizen to the Science, Developing a Broader Scientific Identity Through Natural Science Education. So thank you. Oh,
Aidan,
yeah. Yes.
We can see your screen, but it's showing your desktop, so the slide is very, very small.
Can you,
Perfect.
is that
Perfect.
better?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. That would have been terrible. Awesome. Sweet. How's that? Good?
Yeah, that looks great.
Okay. I want to thank you for the time and letting me share some of my experiences in education in this now virtual venue. So before I get started, I would like to acknowledge that my career in environmental education, my work, my life, learning, has all taken place in the traditional lands of the Ute and Arapaho Native American tribes that still exist today. First, I want to give you a few objectives for the session so you know what to expect over the next 45 minutes. We're going to discuss the concept of positive identity formation as an example of practicing equity in education. I'll introduce some relevant studies to the topic. I'll define the words citizen and community science. And I'll also introduce some of my own action research methods and findings. Also, a couple times in the session, we'll try Zoom's breakout feature. And you should note that if I reference a study, I'll try to put it on the bottom half of the screen so you can reference it yourself if you choose to. So the content of this presentation happens on the campus of my own organization, the Walking Mountains Science Center. So I felt like it would be good to give you a little context of what we do. Walking Mountains wears a lot of hats in our community, but I work in our youth programs department. I'm a master's student that leads our natural science programs, serving students in Eagle County by providing field trips that take place in nature that complement classroom curriculum and standards. And overall, we aim to narrow the achievement gap by enhancing scientific and environmental literacy. Cool. So our programs serve a large array of students. These two charts kind of describe the overall demographics of the students we serve. And if you could broadly summarize the equity issues that our students face, they fall along economic and racial lines. Because despite serving the wealthy communities of Vail and Beaver Creek, about 42% of our students in our valley also qualify for free and reduced lunch. And in our valley, we have about a 32% language learner population as well in our schools. I also want to give you a little bit of context regarding my own background and my own identity formation as a child, because I think it kind of sets the foundation for the rest of the presentation. So I'm here in the middle. I was born abroad and later in life entered the US public school system. And I felt lucky enough to be part of an inclusive environmental education program here in Colorado that placed science and nature in a larger context that then percolated to different aspects of my life. So this is a backpacking trip that I did with the now non-existent Colorado Youth Program. But there's other organizations that certainly played a role in the formation of my identity in regards to the outdoors and natural science. So like I can give shout outs to the Keystone Science School, the Bird Conservancy of the Rockies, Evergreen Nature Center, and also Calwood Education Center as well. And at that moment, I would not have thought that that backpacking trip would have been a pivotal identity formation experience. But here we are. So this is going to be our first breakout opportunity. So let's see how this goes. But for the next 5 minutes, it would be awesome if we could break out into groups of like 3 and answer this question and try to connect it to the reason why you're attending this conference. So what were some of your early moments of identity formation? So maybe reflect on the specific moments that made a difference to you. Who are some of the people or organizations that give you exposures to new ideas? So let's see.
Okay. Yep, I'm gonna try to break out rooms. I think this should work just fine. So we'll see, and we will let you know 1 minute back. So Aidan, you said 5 minutes?
5 minutes would be great, yeah.
All right, sounds good. We'll see you all then. You know, I'm not sure. Sorry, everyone, I'm having to do this a little bit more manually than I thought it would happen. So it's taking just another minute to get everybody in rooms.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
I thought that this would just automatically use the same rooms as our last session, but it's not. Almost there. Sorry about that. All right. Should be everybody. Sorry, Aidan, I put you in a room, but I'm gonna move your people to other rooms.
Oh, gotcha. No
Like,
worries.
yeah, sorry, it looked a little funny with it, having the rooms from the last keynote.
Gotcha.
But
Yeah, I'm curious to see what it looks like from your end, making it happen. See a lot of going on.
It's weird, yeah, some people haven't joined a room, so I'm just trying to move people around so there's not just like one person in a room.
Sure.
It's just, yeah, wow, this is a learning experience for sure.
I'm sure, yeah. And then I guess we should probably put the question for everyone on here.
Oh, sure, yeah, you could chat it out again. So I probably lost track of time, so just let me know when you want me to close the rooms.
Sure. We don't even give them that much time. Maybe in 30 seconds, give them the 1 minute warning.
Okay.
Or something. Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like most have at least 2 people that joined out of their.
Okay.
So.
Cool. See.
I'm gonna give people that 1 minute.
Perfect.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and close the rooms because I think it actually does give them 60 more seconds after I do that. So are you ready for that?
Yeah, anytime.
Okay.
Perfect. All right. Looks like we're all coming back here now. Perfect. Hopefully that was enough time. Let's see, my mic's still on. Okay, perfect. Yeah, hopefully that was enough time. But you kind of got an idea of the different experiences that people had that maybe led us to this conference or led us to your field. And our presentation is going to be focused on that idea of forming identities and positive identities towards something. So I'll also describe a little bit about some research that I'm doing at the Rocky Mountain Science Center. And the action research I'm about to describe started with this chart. As part of our field programs, we have students fill out pre and post assessments so we can evaluate our programming. And this chart shows 5 attitude questions on a 5-point Likert scale that we ask in our attitude assessment. So these are historical averages among students that have attended Rocky Mountains programs. And you may notice that when students are asked to rate their desire to be outside, that's the leftmost column, or their desire to protect the environment or protect nature, their responses are fairly high on the scale. But there is the most space to improve or to grow regarding the 4th question that asks, do you want to be a scientist? For me, this chart really illuminated the fact that there's a disconnect between a student's image of a scientist and their desire to see themselves in that role. And this was interesting to me because I would have conversations with students where they would describe their desire to be veterinarians or teachers or inventors, but they failed to see how science is intimately related to those practices, and then would give low responses in the Likert scale. There's a lot to be said about the sensitivity and accuracy of Likert scales, but I see this room for growth as space that's left for scientific identity. So this space is room for students to broaden their definition of what science is so they can better imagine that they can do science themselves. So I see this gap describing students being trained to do science, but not inspired to be scientists. Maybe they're learning skills in school, but they just need the context to see where it fits in with their own lives, and perhaps outside of a formal scientific setting. So this investigation down the research rabbit hole ultimately came from a curiosity of what factors are at play in scientific identity formation and what we as educators can do to address this gap. So how can one sort of qualify scientific identity? This is a method that I often see pop up in education. In this 1983 study by David Wade Chambers that also built on an earlier 1957 study, found that the most common way that students portray scientists, kind of in the ways I'm about to explain. Chambers called this the Draw Scientist test. And he was able to establish certain, like a baseline of certain elements that dominated the field when it came to reflecting the image of a scientist that students had in their head onto their paper. So students will often reflect scientists with crazy hair, goggles, glasses, a lab coat, a workbench, usually white, male, adult, possibly elderly, performing hard sciences like physics or chemistry, and perhaps an element of danger involved as well. And this is kind of where the purest nature of science gets contextualized. And the insights reflected by the use of the Draw Scientist test can be connected to the nature of science through the lens of social practice theory. And social practice theory states that the identities that we encourage in education settings will inform the values and practices that students retain from an education program. So a lack of perception of diversity, whether it's economic, racial, gender, cultural, et cetera, in science will discourage diverse students from participating according to social practice theory. So it kind of follows that in order for students to overcome barriers to develop a robust definition of the nature of science, a culture of diversity and inclusion among students in science, in addition to intentional relevancy to the individual student, needs to be established so that a student can better identify as a scientist. So the study that I'm performing here at the Rocky Mountain Science Center uses this test in the context of environmental education. And generally, we found that as a result of our programs or attending our programs, these elements that I just described decreased in frequency. So here's a chart displaying that. And at Rocky Mountains, we had students perform a Draw Scientist test both before and after attending our programs. And we found that these stereotypical elements of a scientist significantly decrease in frequency as a result of attending our programming. This might imply that a student's definition of who can do science has changed and perhaps is building capacity towards a different aspect of the nature of science. And these are some of the more large-scale observable trends that emerged as a result of the data we collected with the Draw Scientist test. And when broadly comparing our pre and post assessments, students tend to reflect less of certain things and more of other things. And I listed those in the slides if you want to read them. But one thing you may notice that is missing from the list are racial and economic demographics. This test can tell us a fair bit about identity formation, but a study done by Finson in 2003 found that this test, the Draw Scientist test, can be sometimes inadequate for finding identity formation trends along racial groups as well. But the trends that I mentioned earlier are purely from attending an informal environmental education program. And where things got a little bit more interesting for me is when we added a specific activity that we performed at our programs, citizen science. So in this session, I want to talk about something that our program specifically did to introduce kind of a greater scientific context that, and we're going to get into some of the findings that that we found using a citizen science project in our programs, and really how elements of this activity have the potential to enhance our missions. So first, I should probably define what citizen science is. And in this greater scientific context that I described earlier, I really wanted to see if citizen science fits within that. So I took this definition from a study that I read on the topic of citizen science, and bluntly, I'm not a fan of this definition. Because I think that to effectively use citizen science as a tool, we sort of need to restructure our thinking around it. So first, I want to introduce more equitable language into this definition. So first, I want to replace the word citizen with community. I first heard about this subtle change from my friend Liliana, who is working towards bringing these types of projects to underserved youth in LA. And the word citizen is loaded with connotations surrounding your ability to live in this country. So I also want to remove the word non-scientist as well, because I find it to be condescending. Everyone has the capacity of scientific and critical thinking, and it sort of adds a negative element of exclusivity to the nature of science. So with those revisions in mind, here's a different definition that I'm presenting. Community science is a collaborative data collection method that can answer greater scientific questions. So that then begs the question, what constitutes a greater scientific question? Those greater scientific questions are questions that a small team of researchers can't answer on their own. So this is an example of this concept from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology using community observations from their eBird project. A small team of researchers have an incredibly hard time deriving the abundance of yellow warblers based on the data they could collect on their own. They can make these models to approximate the abundance of this bird, but in reality, this level of accuracy is only possible with a very large data set. So this data set was contributed by birders all around the world. You can imagine that each of these little dots is an observation of a single incidence of a yellow warbler at a certain point in time. And then putting all these dots together, along with some modeling, you're able to tell a larger story. So that's kind of what I mean by a greater scientific question. Which brings me to the next question. What does community science need to look like to be effective? And to answer this question, I drew upon the research of others. Jordan and Ballard in their 2019 study say that in order for citizen or community science to be impactful in an education setting, it needs to be authentic. Finding the opportunity for authentic scientific engagement is a very critical component to effectively implement community science programs. And another study by Mueller and Tippins in 2012 remarked that there are two ways to approach citizen science with students. One is a top-down approach that is the most frequently used with citizen science programs or community science programs. And top-down refers that participants often serve the purpose for collecting data for scientists rather than being true collaborators with scientists. So if you're considering incorporating community science into your own programs, you really need to consider your purpose of doing the program. And I think this is a spot where there's the most potential for pitfall that would limit the effectiveness of the program. And this is an area where, like in all honesty, we need to improve at as well at Walking Mountains. So overall, the big objective between introducing the action of community science should be to broaden the already narrow perception of science that our society constructed. Because science is a larger enterprise, there are many ways that scientific knowledge is developed and conducted and shared. And these actions can be done by a wide diversity of people as well. And we should also ask, why should science education consider identity formation in its programming? Because the act of helping all students develop an identity and affinity towards science is critical to get the perspectives necessary to solve global issues. And developing a robust and accurate definition of the nature of science is critical for students to grow and be literate in the scientific world and frame their own opinions on critical global issues. So for this reason, I would say there is a need in science education to support students in developing a definition of the nature of science to help them think critically on complex issues that require a degree of scientific literacy. So I've been talking for a while. If you have any questions that you want to put in the chat so far, I'm happy to answer any questions. And I'll give it a minute if anyone has a question, but if not, we can move on to the second half of the presentation. Hopefully everyone's doing all right. All right, I don't see any questions, but always feel free to put in the chat. And I'm gonna keep going. Oh, Kyle Donahue says, can we go back to the bar graphs? Sure, let's see. Take a look. So these are 5 questions that we asked, like attitude questions about how students feel about something and they rate it. And Kyle is curious about the post and pre-assessment effects. Can you talk about that? So basically we had students do a pre-assessment and a post-assessment sandwiched around our program at Walking Mountains. And where pre-program, we have them take an assessment, a written assessment, and also draw a scientist and do the same in the post-assessment. And the effects that we saw are that there was a decrease in certain trends, an increase in other trends related to the draw a scientist test and the identity that they form. And academically, we also see improvement in the pre and post assessments as well, where students come away with new knowledge from attending our programs. Let's see. Cool. So, yeah, of course. So what did we do here at Walking Mountains, at the Walking Mountain Science Center? And I think there's a few things to consider if you're going to incorporate a community science project into your programs. First, I would encourage you to think what's unique about your setting. Our programs take place in the Vail Valley, where a project related to snow would make a lot of sense. We tend to get a fair bit of snow up here. And next, I would encourage you to think about what is a relevant local issue that can be put into context with that data that you collect. And for us, we chose to contextualize the depth of a snowpack to the likelihood of wildfires that can affect our higher risk mountain communities. And after identifying those 2 criteria, find a project that might align with those elements of your program. For us, we found the Community Snow Observations Project. This is an NSF and NASA sponsored project that has community members reporting variables related to snow, focusing mostly on snow depth, and using this data to improve remote sensing tools to more accurately gauge the depth of snow around the globe. And the observations, so the actual data collection was super easy for us to do. We took snow probes, essentially these really long sticks. Where's one pictured on the left here, and found the depth. Found the depth of snow at different locations, and then upload that information to the greater scientific community using a phone app. So I had a request to go back to the first consideration really quick, so we'll do that. And to kind of clarify what that first consideration is, think about your place, your location, and what's unique about it. How can you use that to your advantage?
And Aidan, would you be willing to share this PowerPoint after the session so folks can be able to go back and look at these things?
Sure, that'd be great. And this is being recorded as well, right?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So then you can also look at the recording as well, but I'll put a PDF of this PowerPoint in the shared resources folder that CAEE set up as well. Okay, where were we here? Perfect. Oh, And as an aside, these are some projects that you could potentially use, some different avenues you could take. I think there's great potential for these projects for success in environmental education. And you can almost think of these projects as different themes for different lessons. So at Rocky Mountain Science Center, the data we collected along with the data from many other community members are used to refine data sets related to snow depth, including SNOTEL, which is a snow telemetry data set. And we had students look at charts that tell a story of two very different snowpacks. It's a 2018 snowpack that was well below average, and a 2019 snowpack that was well above average. And we asked students to reflect on the implications on our community that we would experience as a result of two different snow years. And it's interesting because they lived through those implications. Especially in 2019, very recent in memory, you can see how the snowpack spikes around February, March, and that corresponded to a large avalanche cycle that is very fresh in the memories of our students. So now is kind of the time for concept invention. Is there a connection from this seemingly like abstract data set to a tangible community impact? How can you make that connection? And in our community, the threats of wildfires are very real and relevant to students. We were presented with a case study that showed two starkly different wildfire seasons, really driven by two very different snowfall seasons. And so much of our behavior in the mountains surrounds mitigating wildfire impacts. And what really tried to do was what we tried to broaden the students' idea of science by providing them a situation where they can contribute data in a way that's relevant and meaningful to their lives. And Lisa is asking, my organization has been advocating for a shift in perception from our role as consumers to that as stewards in our community. And do I have any thoughts about language barriers and baggage that might be problematic? So yeah, absolutely. You know, everyone has different cultural experiences that are going to frame the way that they perceive our programs. And really for us is trying to make our programs as equitable as possible to accommodate those different lived experiences and try to bring those into our programming. A little bit towards the end, I'll kind of give some resources and ideas on how to better achieve that. But that's certainly something that needs to be considered when you're designing your programs. So all of that said, everything that I've shown you in this presentation doesn't say that the students learned a right way to do science, because all those stereotypes that Chambers described are founded in a common and standard scientific language and practice. We presented science as a broader enterprise where the fun day that we spent exploring in the outdoors had a legitimate scientific basis. And I love this picture the student drew for us because it's a snapshot of growth and critical thinking. They took something we did in the program, studying snow, and incorporated it into their own perception of a scientist. And I think this is a perfect view of kind of an incremental step towards broadening scientific identity. Let's see. So if you come away with one thing from this presentation, it's that the identity that our students create now will percolate throughout the rest of their lives. Our programs on their own, by the very intrinsic nature of place-based and learner-centered education, will promote that. But the implications of this research follow the idea presented by Williams and Chawla in their 2016 study that positive identity formation is a driver of action. Specific to scientific identity, if we as educators can broaden the idea of what it means to be a scientist, broaden the diversity of those who can do science, the more likely a student is to form their own connection to that identity. And most importantly, science education needs to be equitable so that students can imagine the possibility of themselves in the science field and applying those skills to all aspects of their lives. So the community science program that we introduced at Rocky Mountains kind of enhanced those results but there are plenty of other methods that will have equity in mind to help students develop their scientific identity. And I want to finish the presentation by outlining some of those resources. But first, I want to wrap up by asking another question. In what way have you personally, or you as an organization, fostered an inclusive learning environment? I ask this because I think it can be a collaborative experience and we can learn from each other. That's the nice thing about having the in-person conference. We can try to bring that element back into the virtual conference. But think about this question while I present the next 5 slides. And type your answer into the chat while I'm going over the next 5 slides. And then at the very end, we'll bring the questions back and maybe we'll share some of those ideas. Let's see. Okay, so these next 5 slides are aimed to give you resources you can take away from this session. Because I think that positive identity formation in science is only possible in inclusive learning environments. And what this all comes down to is to reflect on the learning community that you are fostering in your programs. Is it inclusive or not? To foster an inclusive learning community is to put student equity in the forefront. Community science aside, we also learned that we also used the peer-reviewed and researched beetle learning cycle in developing our program. That helps drive the learner-centered inquiry process, and that can better accommodate students of different backgrounds and experiences. I would also suggest to make sure that you're aligning your programs with the 3-dimensional model that NGSS and the Colorado 2020 standards provide. There is, I'll say something quickly in this slide, that there is a now outdated study that was done in California in 2011 that found that students get an average of 45 minutes of science education per week in their classrooms. These are elementary students. And so a 4 to 5 hour program that you might do at your environmental education center might represent a month's worth of science education. So we have a significant impact in how much exposure to science these students get. I also think it's important to note that we are reaching students at a really critical point in their lives where we can make a significant difference. So I encourage instructors, organization leaders to face on the conscious or unconscious bias that they might have, so they can better serve their students. This is a resource that the instructor bias assessment from the Avarna group that can help you get started with that. Thanks, Rose. A lot of what I have described today could also fall under the umbrella of solutionary education. The idea of we as educators, along with our students, we should tackle real issues that are relevant to students and therefore kind of connecting school to community. I recommend using a free solutionary handbook from the Institute of Humane Research as a great place to start. Zoe Wheel introduces a concept of solutionary learning that puts emphasis on real community issues and then the development of creative solutions as well. Let's see. Also, reflect on your staff as well. Is your staff representative of the greater community that you serve? Here's a good report that the Beatles team at the Lawrence Hall of Science just published that describes a case study at the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy where they built a capacity to attract, hire, and retain a more diverse staff that is representative of their community. Cool, so those are the resources. They're all in the flyers, like a link to resources. They're all in there, so you can all access it, no problem. But let's see if we had any answers to those questions in the chat. If not, we are running out of time, so we can take any other questions as well. Okay, so we got Jackie. Is using nature as the basis for education. Every student can become an expert, which can help include students who do not self-identify as scientists or believe they are good at science. Yeah, that's a great point. You know, it's like that empowerment piece is so important. Kyle Donahue says using inclusive language like friends instead of gendered language like boys, girls, or guys. That's great. Aaron says being aware of the wording we're using to include diverse groups of students. Megan says, as asking a question, how did you facilitate your pre and post survey questions to the students? That's an excellent question. We have the luxury of being able to visit students in their classrooms before doing a field program to get them ready for the field program, to take advantage of the time that we have. And we give our pre-assessments there. We have the classroom space to do so. And then the post-assessments we do in the field towards the end of the program after they've experienced the field science program. Yeah. Rachel says providing as many training opportunities as possible for staff and volunteers. That's also true as well. Perfect. Let's see, anyone else? Angela says, we are working on having our assessment questions at the end of a short program, asking about how pieces of the lesson pertain to the real world situations that are happening. Yeah, so making that intentional connection between school and community, the real world, is really important because that reflection piece is critical to retain that knowledge and retain those thoughts as well. So Michelle from the city of Loveland says, we have been trying to identify barriers to participation in programming, including bus transportation, multilingual vocabulary and presentations, multisensory activities, always trying to expand our audience's accessibility. That's huge. Like so much of our capacity at Walking Mountains is trying to get students to participate in the programs. And so many resources are dedicated towards that. It can be pretty overwhelming for sure. Let's see, Kitty says, we are expanding our programming down valley from Aspen to Parachute. That's a big range. That's really cool. Yeah, and certainly Parachute has a big underserved population there. That would be great to target. That's awesome. Great, so it looks like we are in the last minute of our presentation. So maybe I'll just say thank you for listening. And if you have any additional questions or comments or want to reach out, here's my email. Feel free to shoot me a message and we can continue the conversation. So I'll turn things over back to Rose as we're wrapping up.
And can you unshare your screen?
Yes.
So thank you, Aidan, for offering to adapt the conference today with from a virtual to a sharing. We hope you learned a new strategy or tool to take away. Please take a moment to complete the short session evaluation. I've added the link to the group chat. It's also available along with other shared resources from today's sessions at caee.org virtual PDE Day. Finally, thank you all for joining us. We hope you'll save the date and be able to join us September 13th through 14th at Snow Mountain Ranch. Until then, stay healthy, enjoy another session, and have a great day. Thanks, Aidan.
Thanks, Aidan and Rose. And I just wanted to make one more note that we're gonna close this this link here, this part of the morning. And so we'd love for you to rejoin us this afternoon at 1. There's the links that you can find right on our website to join back in. But we're gonna end this meeting, this part of the day. And so we hope to see you this afternoon.